Imagine a world where a broken silver necklace worn by a struggling waitress who has no clue of its value holds the secret to mending the shattered heart of a billionaire, not in a vault of riches, but in plain sight. The real narrative of Alistair Finch, not some fantastical fairy tale, begins with his tragic loss of the one irreplaceable item that had previously held the globe in his grasp. A prisoner of his memories, he ambulated around the halls of his fortune for 10 years like a ghost. He spent his entire life attached to an irreplaceable painting of his late wife. Power and achievement were seen by the globe. His home was a haven of solitude and grief nevertheless. And then, just like any other random night, fate interfered at a dull restaurant on a rainy Tuesday. His defenses he had erected on Earth would crumble in the face of an unexpected meeting with a young lady called Clara Ara. Something he has kept hidden for a decade serves as a reminder that the most surprising and profound revelations can come from the unlikeliest of sources. There was no life for Alistair Finch. At 58 years of age, he manifested. In the realm of finance, his name was synonymous with massive fortunes and merciless acquisitions. The Park Avenue penthouse he owned seemed more like an institutional art gallery than a residence, even if it offered breathtaking vistas of a city he hardly visited. His days were rhythmic, filled with deliberate decisions, formal board meetings, and meaningless praise. His nights, though, became Elena's property. For a whole decade. The sound of tires screeching on a rain-slicked road had shattered his world axis 10 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago. He laughed with vivacity. Elena. No one had seen Elena. Above the frigid marble hearth in his private study, a wonderful painting hung, and the only things left were the specters that haunted his memories. For Alistair, the painting served as both a refuge and a jail. Julian Croft, the renowned artist, painted it a year before she passed away, and it depicted her spirit with an almost otherworldly precision. All eyes are on her green eyes, which sparkle with intellect. Her auburn hair cascades over her shoulder, and the moon pendant, the object of Alistair's decadent passion, encircles her neck. It lacked pretentiousness. Crafted by hand from sterling silver, the item featured a lovely crescent moon holding a single small sapphire that glistened like a caught star. He had ordered it for their first wedding anniversary from a reclusive craftsman in the Tuscan highlands. It was really unique. Alejandro Bellini, the artist, had died a few months after he made it. It had been beloved by Elena. His actions were so special to her that she felt as if he had strung a celestial necklace around her neck. On the fateful night of the accident, she wore it. Clinical was the tone of the police report. The damage was devastating, and the automobile was wrecked. No one ever found the locket. It was either swallowed up in the mayhem, burned to ash, or taken by an anonymous thief in the wake of the disaster. Its demise was a second excruciating death for Alistair. The last physical connection between them had faded into thin air, and he was unable to save it. Going to the Gilded Sparrow for supper once a week was his one and only ritual, the one thing that broke his regimented schedule. He and Elena had dined at that place the previous time they were together. Staring across at the vacant seat across from him, he would repeat every Tuesday his routine of ordering the pan-seared scallops she had adored and sipping the same glass of cider. He felt self-flagellation on this painful trek. It was his due. The city poured with chilly continuous rain on this Tuesday, reflecting Alistair's eternal winter within. Marcus, his stoic chauffeur of 20 years, drew the Rolls-Royce Phantom up to the curb. "Mr. Finch, we are present." Alistair remained silent. Entering the Gilded Sparrow's warm amber light, he merely stepped out, allowing the doorman's umbrella to shelter him from a world he hardly noticed, and got ready for another night with his ghost. The apron was being retied around Clara Ara Maeve's slim waist in the midst of the restaurant's busy staff hallway. Life was always a delicate balancing act when I was 24 years old. On the other hand, she was a bright art history major at Hunter College who was often short on cash. She was a waitress by night. Although she went unnoticed by the exacting colonel, her graceful efficiency won him over. Leo, her 17-year-old brother, and she lived in a small two-bedroom apartment in Queens while she was a high school student, long after their parents had departed. She had no acquaintance with their father, who was a specter, and Sarah, their mother, had died 4 years before from a terrible disease. Her sole link to the mother she longed for with an intense, agonizing affection was slung around Clara Ara's neck and concealed behind her uniform's collar. The crescent moon and little sapphire star adornment on the silver necklace were exquisite and one of a kind. It had been presented to her by her mother on her 18th birthday. Sarah had spoken in a soft but comforting voice, "My love." And this serves as a reminder that there is light and beauty in the world even in the darkest of times. Never forget that the modest but devoted nurse Clara Ara's mother had no idea where she had received the precious diamond. It was a gift from a soul I met on a very dark night. Sarah would respond with a sorrowful grin whenever she was asked. Beloved by Clara Ara, it served as a protective charm from the monotony of her existence. Mr. Dubois, the floor manager, who seems to be always worried, gave her the corner booth to use tonight. "You have table 7, Clara Ara. This is Mr. Finch. This is by now a familiar procedure. Get moving. Keep silent. Leave small conversation at the door. He is picky." With a bland look, Clara Ara nodded. He was known to her. Finch, the melancholy, quiet man who came each week to do nothing except look. For some reason, she felt a twinge of compassion for him. It was as if he had the entire planet at his fingertips, but had misplaced his map. She straightened her back, grabbed a water cup and menu, and made her way to table 7, oblivious to the fact that she was about to enter the epicenter of a storm that had been raging for 10 years. Seated rigidly, Alistair stared at the candle in the table's middle as it flickered. Even as it danced, the light was still hidden from his view by the shadows cast by the blaze. He had gotten used to ignoring the subdued symphony of the restaurant, the low murmur of conversation, the distant tune of a piano, the clink of cutlery on china, and so on. He had retreated to his familiar and almost comfortable grieving bubble. With the air of an accomplished expert, Clara Ara made her way to the table. Her voice was low and unassuming as she greeted the man with a "Good evening, sir." Without taking his gaze off the light, Alistair nodded in a brief, quite imperceptible manner. Alistair felt a brief flash of intrusive light as the pendant, a crescent moon holding a sapphire star, swung softly forward, catching the candlelight. Instinctively, he glanced up, irritated by the distraction. But then, time stood still. She leaned forward, revealing the delicate silver chain around her neck. He blinked forcefully, expecting it to fade away, but it lingered in the space between them, eerily real, the exquisite curve of the silver moon, the exact deep blue of the sapphire, and the one-of-a-kind hand-wrought texture he had thumb-traced 1,000 times. His brain was struggling to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. His carefully constructed demeanor, strengthened by a decade of disciplined mourning, didn't just crack. It exploded. Clara Ara froze. The water carafe hovered over his glass. A sound escaped his lips, a choked, guttural gasp louder than any word he had spoken in years. The object in question was the moon locket. His once lifeless wide eyes were now fixed on the necklace, and a terrifying raw intensity had taken hold of them. "Where?" He stammered, his voice a ragged whisper that ripped through the genteel ambiance of the restaurant. His hand, which had signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, started to tremble violently. He extended his hand not to touch, but as if compelled by an unseen power. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Clara instinctively retreated, her heart thumping against her ribs. She protectively clutched the locket. "I'm sorry, sir." He breathed, his face contorted with a decade's worth of unshed tears. The overwhelming grief he had repressed with such iron will was now engulfed in it. His eyes welled up with tears, and a trail of them ran down his stony face. Alistair Finch, the Rock of Wall Street, was teetering on the brink of collapse right before her eyes. He struggled to stand, his body quaking from the seismic shock that had hit his soul. He pushed back his chair, the legs screeching against the polished floor. He whispered the name, a sacred broken prayer, to Eleanor. The nearby tables had already fallen silent, and the diners stared, their forks frozen in midair. Mr. Dubois, sensing the chaos, quickly put on a mask of panicked professionalism. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Clara, what did you do?" he hissed, as if his waitress were somehow to blame. However, Alistair was unaffected. It was as if 10 years of silence had suddenly broken, and all he could see was the locket, a relic from a past life, a ghost in silver and sapphire. He sank back into his chair, his head buried in his hands, and started to cry. These were not dignified tears, but wrenching, soul-searing sobs that echoed the violent ripping of old wounds. The restaurant, the staring faces, Mr. Dubois' frantic apologies, and Clara Ara's overwhelming emotions of confusion, fear, and bewildering pity all blended together as she stood motionless. The powerful and intimidating man was crying like a lost child over her mother's necklace. There was a sudden shift in her reality with a bereaved billionaire and the simple silver moon she wore around her neck at its center, all of which faded into a controlled chaos. Suddenly, the chauffeur of Marcus Alistair, who had been waiting in the lobby, strode over to the table, his presence commanding and soothing. He and Mr. Az Alistair continued to sob. Dubois pulled him to his feet. "Please accept my deepest apologies for the disruption." Marcus remarked, his voice a low rumble that addressed both the individual and the group. While escorting his distressed boss to the door, Alistair paused. With red-rimmed and frantic eyes, he turned around and saw Clara Ara among the crowd of spectators. The intensity of his voice betrayed his need to communicate with you. He retrieved a thick, cream-colored business card from his jacket pocket after some fiddling. His fingers were icy as he pushed it into her quivering hand. "Kindly dial this phone number. Direct your inquiry to me. No matter how small, it is crucial." Afterwards, he departed. Swooped out into the dark rain, causing the restaurant patrons to hush with shock and wonder. As she held the card in her hand, Clara Ara gazed down at it. Sir Alistair Finch, Chief Executive Officer of Finch Global, Inc. The weight of the embossed letters was akin to a summons. The moment she reached for it, Mr. Dubois grabbed it. His angry, fearful face became red as he asked, "What is the meaning of this, mate? Tell me what you told him." "Not a single thing. Absolutely nothing was done by me." A trembling Clara Ara spoke out in her defense. His heart sank the moment he laid eyes on my jewelry. Dubois sneered, but a hint of doubt flashed over his face. "A piece of jewelry. Put an end to it. Your balance is precarious. Retract your steps. Later on, I will attend to you." He snatched the card and swung over to touch his other affluent customers. Clara Ara fled to the staff room in a state of humiliation. Peering, pitying eyes were directed at her by her co-workers. Under the microscope, she felt like a specimen. Mechanistically cleaning dishes and refilling glasses occupied her remaining shift time. She kept having the same terrifying out-of-body experience. She would never forget the sight of Alistair Finch's mask-like visage, which represented unadulterated misery. The next night on her journey back to Queens via the subway, The steady clatter of the train provided a welcome contrast to the cacophony of her own mind. As it rested on her flesh, the silver locket had an unsettling weight. From a spirit I encountered on a dark night, this is a gift. With a new, enigmatic meaning, her mother's words resounded in her thoughts. Upon her return, she found Leo dozing off on the couch with his history textbook propped open on his chest. She took him to her cozy room after delicately covering him with a blanket. She removed some old, fading pictures of her mom from a weathered wooden box. Sarah Maeve was an enduring force in her community. She was a strong, quiet lady who had worked extra shifts as an emergency room nurse to provide a better life for her children. None of the photographs showed her with the locket on. It wasn't until Clara Ara was 18 that she realized she'd never seen it outside of its velvet case. In particular, her mother's life prior to having children was a well-guarded secret. Because she was so focused on the future, she hardly ever mentioned the past. Might this necklace hold the secret to that long-lost history? Restaurant tensions were high the next day. Mr. Dubois was quite cold and uncaring toward her. It seemed like her dismissal was imminent. But a stylish black vehicle sped by right as the lunch rush started. Recalling the previous night, the same Rolls-Royce arrived at the curbside. Entering the restaurant, we saw Marcus, the chauffeur. He swung around to face Clara Ara, completely ignoring Mr. Dubois. "Miss Maeve," he continued with a bow. "Mr. Finch has asked me to bring you to his house because he wants you here today." His attention shifted to Dubois. "Also, before Miss Maeve leaves with me, Mr. Finch wants you to give her back the card you stole from her and pay her for the whole day." Paleness spread across Mr. Dubois. Swiftly returning the card to Clara Ara, he fumbled an apology. The balance of power has changed drastically. She went from being an obnoxious waitress to an esteemed guest of the room's most powerful guy. The thought frightened Clara. Just what was he after? Was she in danger of any kind? However, her insatiable curiosity propelled her ahead. Despite the peculiar occurrence at the restaurant, this was more significant than her work. She felt compelled to tug on this thread since it led back to her mother. Squeaking out a barely audible, "Okay," she said. She removed her apron for what seemed like the final time and accompanied Marcus to the waiting car. As the gentle thud of the plush leather door shut, separating her from the familiar world of her hardships, she held tightly to the silver moon locket. As she drove to Alistair Finch's house, the rain had stopped, and the city shimmered in the pale afternoon light. But inside the car, a quiet solemnity pervaded the air. She felt a terrible sense of impending doom as she entered the heart of a mystery. Leaving the gritty energy of Midtown behind, they made their way uptown to the hallowed old money canyons of the Upper East Side. A limestone mansion, more resembling a national monument than a home, came into view as they pulled into a private, gated driveway. Marcus escorted her through an incredibly grand entrance hall with polished marble floors, 3 stories of ceilings, and utter silence, broken only by the gentle echo of their footsteps. There was no life in the palace, just a gilded prison for one. He led her into a large drawing room where the priceless and exquisite furniture stood unmoved as if it were on display in a museum. Alistair Finch stood opposite her, facing a tall window that overlooked a well-kept garden. He appeared different from the distraught man in the restaurant. Even though he wore a sharp gray suit today, an unseen weight hung heavily over his shoulders. As she walked in, he turned to greet her, his expression changing from one of intense pain to one of great regret. "Miss Maeve," he murmured, his voice polite and subdued. "Thank you for coming. For what I did last night, please accept my sincerest apologies. It couldn't be excused." Clara whispered, "It's all right, even if it wasn't," as he asked, "Are you okay?" A hint of astonishment, as if she may ask, passed his features. "I will be. I have something important to show you. You have to see it to understand." I'm taking you out of the drawing room and down a long corridor with paneling to explain why I had an outburst." He came to a halt in front of a pair of stately oak doors and pried them open, letting light pour into a study. Leather-bound volumes filled the room to the ceiling with a wide mahogany desk at one end. However, the room's focal point, the painting hanging over the enormous, unlit fireplace, caused Clara Ara to gasp. Her heart stopped as her art history-trained eyes landed on the woman's neck, taking in the details, the masterful brushstrokes, and the play of light and shadow. The work of art was a picture of a woman whose stunning beauty was frozen in a moment of tranquil joy. The woman wore an emerald green dress that complemented her fiery auburn hair and sparkling green eyes. She seemed to be alive, as if she could leap out of the frame at any moment. Her necklace, the crescent moon, and the sapphire star were all depicted in exquisite glowing detail by the artist. "That's," she said, her voice fading as she approached. As Alistair gazed at the artwork, his voice was heavy with unshed tears. He said, "That's impossible." Her name was Elena, starting with, "She was my wife." He proceeded to recount the tale of the locket. He informed her about Alejandro Bellini, the solitary Tuscan craftsman, as well as the fact that he had commissioned the unique work to commemorate their first anniversary. It had become an integral part of Elena's identity, he said, and she had never removed it. That fateful night she was donning it. "My voice is breaking," he murmured. On her way back from seeing her sister upstate, she got in her car. A storm had made the roadways slippery. According to the report, the vehicle collided with a patch of black ice. The jewelry and the artwork held his undivided attention. They combed through the rubble for days. To sort through all of the trash, I assembled my own crew. Never again. I thought it had been taken or destroyed. I thought it was gone for good for a decade. With begging eyes, he eventually shifted his attention away from the image and toward Clara Ara. "Moreover, I witnessed you last night, donning her necklace, so donning a fragment of my wife's spirit. It is imperative that you clarify how it ended up in your hands, Miss Maeve." With her thoughts racing, Clara Ara was unable to speak. A sense of global imbalance was palpable. Her gaze shifted between the painted and genuine lockets, the latter of which she held firmly in her palm. You couldn't tell them apart. There was no difference between them. She breathed deeply and discovered her voice. "This belonged to my mom." Feeling little and unworthy amid the vast room, she said her remarks. Sarah Maeve was her name. She worked as a nurse. It was my 18th birthday, and right before Mom died away, she handed it to me. It was a gift bestowed on her during a particularly gloomy night, she informed me. Alistair's forehead wrinkled. Hannah Maeve, a registered nurse. To me, the name is meaningless. Were we acquainted, ended up being friends? Because honestly, I don't think so, Clara Ara said. Elena was never mentioned by my mom. This kind of circling wasn't done by us. The air between them was heavy with the understatement. The air was thick with tension. They were beamed down by the lovely lady in the painting. With a hidden meaning, her painted eyes bridged the gap between these two hopeless realms. Alistair perceived the specter of his late wife, while Clara Ara pondered the enigma surrounding her mother.